When I shot again, a bullet entered his chest. I'm going to fight kicking and screaming all the way to electric chair.
So there must have been something in you that was getting you to
Oh,
do
you
that.
are lost, Nick!
So
I was a hitchhiking hooker.
Right.
Running into trouble. I'd shoot the guy if I ran into trouble.
Living in prison every day is a struggle, even at its best.
Since 1976, when the Supreme Court of the United States lifted the moratorium on capital punishment, 17 women have been executed. Women represent less than 1.1% of the executions performed in the United States. Here are all the crimes they committed, their last words, and their last meals. Margie Velma Barfield was born on October 29, 1932, and she died on November 2, 1984. She was an American serial killer who was convicted of one murder, but who eventually confessed to 6 murders in total. Barfield was the first woman in the US to be executed after the 1976 resumption of capital punishment. She was also the first woman to be executed by lethal injection. When Velma was apprehended, the Central Prison of North Carolina did not have a special area for death row women inmates, as she was the only woman in the state sentenced to death. One appeal to commute her death sentence to life in prison was submitted, citing behavioral changes in her years on death row, as she became a devoted Christian, even ministering for prisoners. She was also examined by psychiatrists that said she suffered from a mental illness named dissociative identity disorder because she endured sexual abuse, and her alter ego Billy was the one that protected her by the abusers by ending their lives. The federal court denied her appeals as the judge was not convinced by the plea, and Barfield opted for not submitting any other appeal. Her last meal consisted in cheese doodle and Coca-Cola, and her last words were the following statement: "I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I'm sorry. And I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years." She was then executed by lethal injection. Karla Faye Tucker was born on 18th of November 1959, and she died on February 3rd, 1998. She was an American woman sentenced to death for killing 2 people with a pickaxe during a burglary. She was the first woman to be executed in the US since Velma Barfield in 1984 in North Carolina, and the first in Texas since Chipita Rodriguez 1863. She was convicted of murder in Texas in 1984 and executed by lethal injection after 14 years on death row. Due to her gender and widely publicized conversion to Christianity, she inspired an unusually large national and international movement that advocated the commutation of her sentence to life without parole, a movement that included a few foreign government officials as well. For her last meal, Tucker requested a banana, a peach, and garden salad with ranch dressing. Her last words were, "Yes, sir, I would like to say to all of you, the Thornton family and Jerry Dean's family, that I'm so sorry. I hope God will give you peace with this." Looking at her husband, she said, "Baby, I love you." Looking at Ronald Carson, said, "Ron, give Peggy a hug for me." She then looked at all present, weeping and smiling. "Everybody has been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now. Warden Baggett, thank you all of you so much. You have been so good to me. I love all of you very much. I will see you all when you get there. I will wait for you." As the lethal injection chemicals were being administered, she praised Jesus Christ, licked her lips, looked at the ceiling, and hummed. She was pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m., 8 minutes after the lethal injection was administered. Judy Buenoano, also known as Judias Goodyear and Judias Morris, was born on April 4, 1943, and she died on the 30th of March, 1998. She was an American serial killer who was executed for the 1971 murder of her husband James Goodyear. She was also convicted for the 1980 murder of her son Michael Buenoano and of the 1983 attempted murder of her then boyfriend John Gentry. Buenoano is also acknowledged to have been responsible for the 1978 death of her boyfriend Bobby Joe Morris in Colorado. However, by the time authorities made the connection between Buenoano and Morris, she had already been sentenced to death in the state of Florida. Buenoano was the first woman to be executed in Florida since 1848 or electrocuted in the US since 1976. Her last meal consisted of broccoli, asparagus, strawberries, and hot tea. When asked if she had any last words, Buenoano said, No, sir. Betty Lou Beets was born on the 12th of March 1937 and she died on the 24th of February 2000. She was a murderer executed in the U.S. state of Texas. She was convicted of shooting her fifth husband, Jimmy Don Beets, on August 6, 1983. Beets had a criminal history prior to her arrest for murder, including public lewdness and shooting former husband Bill Lane in the side of the abdomen. Married 6 times, twice to the same man, Beets shot her second husband, Billy York Lane, twice in the back in 1970. She was acquitted after Billy admitted he had threatened her life first, and the two remarried, divorcing again a month later. She later tried to run over her third husband, Ronnie C. Trecold, with her car in 1978. Both men survived and testified at her murder trial. Beets was executed by lethal injection at 6:18 p.m. on February 24, 2000 in the Huntsville unit. She did not request a final meal, nor did she have any last words. Beets was the second woman to be executed in the state after the reintroduction of the death penalty. Christina Marie Riggs was born on September 2, 1971, and she died on the 2nd of May 2000. She was convicted of the November 1997 murders of her 2 children, Justin Dalton Thomas, age 5, and Shelby Alexis Riggs, age 2. Riggs was a licensed practitioner nurse, and she planned to kill the children with injections of drugs she obtained from her hospital. When she injected her son with potassium chloride, it caused pain but not death, so she smothered both children to death, then attempted suicide. Defense attorneys mentioned Riggs' depression and post-traumatic stress disorder during her trial, but Riggs did not put up a defense in the penalty phase. She waived her appeals and was executed by lethal injection less than 2 years after her convictions. She was the first woman to be executed in Arkansas since 1845. Her statement before execution began, "No words can express just how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. No way I can make up for or take away the pain I have caused everyone who knew and loved them." Her last words were, "I love you, my babies." Riggs was then executed with a potassium chloride injection. Wanda Jean Allen was born on the 17th of August 1959 and she died on 11th of January 2001. She was sentenced to death in 1989 for the murder of Gloria Jean Leathers, 29 years old, her longtime girlfriend. Allen was the first black woman to be executed in the US since 1954. She was the 6th woman to be executed since executions resumed in the US of 1977. Her last meal request was a bag of chips. While lying on the execution gurney, Allen said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." She also stuck her tongue out and smiled at her appeal lawyer David Presson, who had become her friend. He says she was dancing on the mattress while they were trying to kill her. She was pronounced dead at 9:21 p.m. Marilyn Kay Plantz hired her teenage boyfriend Clifford Bryson and his friend William McKimble to kill her husband for about $300,000 in life insurance. Entering his home after work, he was ambushed by Bryson and McKimble and beaten with ball bats while Plantz and the kids were asleep in bed. Plantz got up and instructed them to burn him to make it look like an accident. Marilyn Kay Plantz, 40 years old, was executed on May 1, 2001 via lethal injection at Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. William Bryson, who was executed on June 15, 2000, was also sentenced to death for this murder. Clinton Eugene McKimble was also charged with first-degree murder in this case, but he pled guilty and was given a sentence of life imprisonment in exchange for his testimony against Plantz and Bryson. Plantz was the second woman executed since statehood 1907, as well as the second woman executed that year. Wanda Jean Allen was executed in 2001 as well. Her last words were, "I want to tell all my family that I love them very much, especially Trina and Chris," Plantz said, referring to her 2 children who did not attend. "What God has given me is love, and I have overcome the world. And I just want y'all to know that nothing, absolutely nothing, can separate us from the love of God. And if y'all want to see me again, you must be born again." For her last meal, she requested 1 chicken taco salad, 1 Mexican pizza, 2 enchiritos, 2 chicken soft tacos, 1 order of cinnamon twists, 1 piece of pecan pie, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola. Lois Nadine Smith was convicted of the July 4, 1982 murder of 21-year-old Cindy Bailey. Bailey was the former girlfriend of Smith's son, Greg. Smith, along with her son and another woman, picked up Bailey from a Tahlequah motel early on the morning of the murder. As they drove away from the motel, Smith confronted Bailey about rumors that Bailey had arranged for Greg Smith's murder, charges which Bailey denied. Smith choked Bailey and stabbed her in the throat as they drove to the home of Smith's ex-husband. At the house, Smith forced Bailey to sit in a recliner and taunted her with a pistol, finally firing several shots. Bailey fell to the floor, and while her son reloaded the pistol, Smith laughed and jumped on Bailey's neck. Her last words were, "To the families, I want to say I'm sorry for the pain and loss I've caused you. I ask that you forgive me. You must forgive to be forgiven." For her last meal, she wanted barbecue ribs, onion rings, strawberry banana cake, and a cherry lemonade. Linda Cheryl Lyon Block was born on February 8, 1948, and she died on May 10, 2002. She was an American convicted murderer. On October 4, 1993, Block's common-law husband, George Sibley, and Block's 9-year-old son were in a parked car in the parking lot of a Walmart store in Opelika, Alabama. A passerby expressed concern for Block's son to Opelika Police Sergeant Roger Motley, saying it appeared to her as if the boy wanted help. She also believed the family could be living in the vehicle. At that time, Sibley and Block were on the run from the law in Florida after failing to appear for sentencing on an assault charge against Block's ex-husband. Motley found Sibley's car, parked behind, and approached it, and asked for Sibley's license. By Sibley's own account, he was explaining to Motley his personal theory that he was not required to have one when he observed Motley placing his hand on his gun. Sibley then drew his gun and began shooting at Motley, who returned fire, wounding Sibley. Motley took cover behind his patrol car. Witnesses stated Sibley fired first. Block was at a payphone when she heard the gunfire. She drew her gun, and witnesses stated that she was in a crouched position when she fired. Block claimed that she fired just as she stopped running toward Motley. As Motley turned to face Block, she fired again, hitting him in the chest. Motley, who had given his bulletproof vest to another officer, was mortally wounded. Although it could not be determined who fired the fatal shot, both Block and Sibley were convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Block was executed on May 10, 2002. Before the execution, 3 friends visited Block for several hours. Block also saw a spiritual advisor. She had not requested a last meal, nor did she make a final statement. At 12:10 a.m., she was pronounced dead. She was the last person to be electrocuted in Alabama. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956, and she died on October 9, 2002. She was an American serial killer. Between 1989 and 1990, while engaging in street prostitution along highways in Florida, she shot dead and robbed 7 of her male clients. Wuornos claimed that her clients had either raped or attempted to rape her, and that all of the homicides were committed in self-defense. She declined her last meal, which could have been anything under $20, and she opted for a cup of coffee instead. Her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back." She died at 9:47 a.m. She was the second woman in Florida and the 10th in the U.S. to be executed since the 1976 United States Supreme Court decision restoring capital punishment. Frances Elaine Newton was born on the 12th of April 1965 and she died on September 14, 2005. She was executed by lethal injection in the state of Texas for the April 7, 1987 murder of her husband Adrian, which was 23 years old, her son Alton, which was 7 years old, and daughter Farah, which was only 21 months. All 3 victims were shot with a pistol which belonged to a man that Newton had been seeing at the time. Newton claimed that an illegal drug dealer killed the 3. The Houston police presented evidence that Newton's husband was a drug dealer and was in debt to his supplier. Newton maintained her innocence from her first interrogation in 1987 until her execution in 2005. 3 weeks before the slayings, Newton actually purchased life insurance policies for herself, for her husband, and for her daughter. They were each worth $50,000, and she named herself as the sole beneficiary on her husband's and daughter's policies. Newton was also found to have placed a paper bag containing the murder weapon in a relative's home shortly after the murders. On October 25, 1988, Newton was convicted of the murders and sentenced to death, but she spent nearly 17 years on death row before finally being executed by lethal injection on September 14, 2005. Newton made no final statement and she did not have a last meal request. She was the third woman executed in Texas since the resumption of the capital punishment in 1982. Teresa Wilson Bean Lewis was born on the 26th of April 1969 and she died on the 23rd of September 2010. She was an American murderer who was the only woman on death row in Virginia prior to her execution. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection for the murders of her husband and stepson in October 2002. Lewis sought to profit from a $250,000 life insurance policy her stepson had taken out as a U.S. Army reservist in anticipation of his deployment to Iraq. In September 2010, Lewis became the first female inmate to die by lethal injection in the state of Virginia. The state had last executed a woman back in 1912. Lewis's last meal consisted of 2 fried chicken breasts, sweet peas with butter, a Dr. Pepper, and apple pie for dessert. Lewis addressed stepdaughter Kathy Lewis Clifton, who came to witness her execution, to apologize for killing her brother and father. Her last words were, "I just want Kathy to know that I love you, and I'm very sorry." She spent her last hour praying and singing hymns. Kimberly McCarthy was a death row inmate and suspected serial killer. She was convicted and sentenced to death for the 1997 murder of her neighbor, 71-year-old retired college professor Dorothy Booth, in her Lancaster, Texas home during a robbery. She was a suspect in the murders of 2 other elderly Texas women, for which she was never tried. On June 26, 2013, McCarthy became the 500th person to be executed by the state of Texas by lethal injection. At that time, Texas was no longer offering special last meal to death row inmates. Instead, she was served whatever the unit was served that day. McCarthy's last words were, "This is not a loss. This is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I love you all." Suzanne Margaret Basso was born on 15th of May 1954 and she died on February 5th, 2014. She was an American woman who was one of the 6 co-defendants convicted in the August 1998 torture and murder of Louis Buddy Musso, a mentally disabled man who was killed for his life insurance money. She was sentenced to death in October 1999 and she was executed by lethal injection on February the 5th, 2014. Since Texas was no longer serving last meal requests on death row, Basso ate regular prison fare of baked chicken, fish, boiled eggs, carrots, green beans, and sliced bread. When asked if she had a last statement, she replied to the prison warden, "No, sir." She was pronounced dead at 6:26 p.m. Devontae Williams was a 9-year-old boy who in 2004 died of malnutrition at his apartment in Arlington, Texas. He weighed 35 pounds at the time of his death. Devontae's mother, Marcella L. Williams, and his mother's partner, Lisa Ann Coleman, were arrested, accused of depriving Devontae of food and charged with capital murder. Marcella Williams entered a guilty plea in exchange for a sentence of life imprisonment, while Coleman refused the plea deal. She was found guilty and received a death sentence. The 9-year-old had 250 scars on his body when he died. There were infected wounds on his wrists and legs where he had been bound with plastic extension cords. There was a fresh tear in the child's lip and a healing tear where the ear meets the side of the head. A bloodstain was found on a golf club in the home. Lisa Coleman received a lethal injection about an hour after the U.S. Supreme Court rejected the last day appeal to spare her. She was pronounced dead at 6:24 p.m., 12 minutes after Texas Department of Criminal Officials began administering a lethal dose of pentobarbital. Coleman became the 9th convicted killer and 2nd woman to receive lethal injection in Texas that year. Nationally, she was the 5th woman executed since the Supreme Court in 1976 allowed the death penalty to resume. During that same time, nearly 1,400 men have been put to death. Coleman smiled and nodded to several friends and an aunt who watched through a window, thanking them and expressing her love. She also said she loved the other women on Texas death row and urged them to keep their heads up. "I'm all right," she said. "Tell them I finished strong. God is good." She mouthed an audible kiss, laughed, and nodded to her witnesses in the seconds before the lethal drug took effect. "Love you all," she said before closing her eyes and taking a couple of short breaths. Then there was no further movement. Again, she was in Texas, so she was not offered a special meal request. Instead, she was served what the rest of the unit had, which was a fried pork chop, macaroni and cheese, carrots, green beans, navy beans, sliced bread, and pineapple orange cake with a choice of tea, punch, or water to drink. Kelly Renee Gissendaner was born on March 8, 1968, and she died on September 30, 2015. She was an American woman who was executed by the U.S. state of Georgia because she has been convicted of orchestrating the murder of her husband, Douglas Gissendaner. At the time of the murder, Kelly was 28 years old and her husband was 30. After her conviction and until her execution, Gissendaner was the only woman on death row in Georgia. Kelly recruited her lover to kill her husband. Her boyfriend, Gregory Owen, testified against her as part of a plea bargain that landed him a life sentence but spared him from the death penalty. Her last meal request was cheese dip and chips, Texas fajita nachos, and a diet frosted lemonade. She was executed by lethal injection and she was pronounced dead at 12:21 a.m. Gissendaner cried, prayed, and sang Amazing Grace and said, "And I love you, Sally, and I love you, Susan. You let my kids know I went out singing Amazing Grace. And tell the Gissendaner family I am so sorry. That amazing man lost his life because of me, and if I could take it back, if this would change it, I would have done it a long time ago. But it's not, and I just hope they can find peace. And I hope they find some happiness. God bless you." Lisa Marie Montgomery was born on the 27th of February 1968. She is an American woman from Malvern, Kansas, who was convicted of the 2004 murder of Bobby Joe Stinnett. Montgomery killed the pregnant Stinnett before cutting Stinnett's unborn baby out of the womb and kidnapping her. Montgomery met Stinnett online in a Red Terrier chatroom called Ratter Chatter. Posing as Darlene Fisher, Montgomery told Stinnett that she too was pregnant. The two women chatted online and exchanged emails about their pregnancy. Montgomery then arranged a meeting at Stinnett's home under the pretext of wanting to buy a red terrier. On December 16, 2004, Montgomery strangled the pregnant woman with a pink neon rope in her home in Skidmore, Missouri, and cut the premature infant from her womb. She then later attempted to pass the infant girl off as her child. Stinnett was discovered by her mother, Becky Harper, in a pool of blood about an hour after the assault. Harper immediately called 911, describing the wounds inflicted upon her daughter as appearing as if her stomach had exploded. Attempts to revive Stinnett were unsuccessful, and she was pronounced dead at St. Francis Hospital in Maryville, Missouri. The next day, December 17, 2004, Montgomery was at her farmhouse when she was arrested. After Montgomery's capture by police, the day-old baby was recovered. Victoria Jo Stinnett was returned to the care of her father, Zeb Stinnett. Montgomery was executed by lethal injection on the 13th of January 2021. When asked if she had any last words, she replied, no. She was pronounced dead at 1:31 a.m. There are no reports about what she ordered for her last meal. I'm curious, what do you guys think about all these women? Is there any of them that you feel like should have gotten life in prison instead of the death penalty? I personally feel sorry for Aileen Wuornos and Christina Marie Riggs. Aileen had a very rough childhood and she was clearly mentally ill. If you will watch the interview that she had before her execution, you'll understand what I mean. As for Christina, in my opinion, she probably had postpartum depression and that's what caused the events that led to the murder. I'm not by any means saying that these women are guilt-free or that they should have been released, but I'm thinking that maybe life in prison would have been a more appropriate sentence in their cases. Thank you very much for watching my video. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment down below. Until next time, bye bye.